What's up everybody, I'm HoopsandHipHop. So with the Pokemon franchise being over 20 years old at this point, and we're now almost entering into the 8th generation, there are a ton of different things that we've seen from Pokemon within each and every generation over the years. Every generation obviously brings with it new Pokemon, new characters, and new features for players to try out. But there's also a lot of things we've learned about over the years that various generations were going to implement within the game that they ultimately held back for one reason or another. And if any one of these things in particular actually happened like it was planned to, it would have had a drastic effect on not only the generation that it was planned to debut in, but possibly even in some instances, the entire Pokemon franchise as a whole. And that is what we're going to be talking about today, the biggest what-ifs of every Pokemon generation. So in a nutshell, basically what we're going to be covering here is the thing from each and every generation that would have caused the biggest change to that generation and possibly the franchise overall if it had actually been included into the games. These have all been learned about thanks to various reports and interviews over the years, and we're basically just going to discuss what would have actually happened had these things actually occurred. So without any further ado, why don't we go ahead and take a look at the biggest what-ifs of every Pokemon generation. Starting off in Gen 1, we actually have two major things that would have made Pokemon literally not even Pokemon if it had been implemented. And that was the potential feature of trainers having whips and actually fighting Pokemon themselves instead of with other Pokemon, and also the presence of a charisma stat which would have seen trainers not catching Pokemon in Pokeballs, but basically persuading them to join their team with their charisma. The feature of people fighting Pokemon themselves and using whips to do so was actually revealed to us by Ken Sugimori, but you can even see it for yourself in the final Red and Blue games, because there are several trainers, including Sabrina the gym leader, that actually still hold whips within their trainer sprites. This must mean that it was a fairly late change to the overall development of the game if some assets from that idea still made it into the final, and I think it's pretty easy to see how this would have completely changed Pokemon forever. It obviously would have made it significantly more violent, and given the fact that Pokemon has already dealt with a lot of animal abuse allegations over the years in the form that it's currently in, if people were whipping Pokemon themselves in the game, that would have just caused the Pokemon franchise to never get off the ground at all, and probably would have seen way more controversies because of it. As far as the charisma stat feature goes, according to Bulbapedia, there was once consideration for a charisma stat feature where, as I said earlier, it would basically replace catching Pokemon with Pokeballs, in where instead of catching the Pokemon with a ball, you would basically convince them with your overall level or experience to join your team, and that's kind of how the catching Pokemon mechanic would have worked. Now, once again, while not as potentially detrimental to the Pokemon franchise overall, this would have completely changed everything we know about it, because as we know, the slogan of the entire franchise for a very long time was "gotta catch 'em all," and if the charisma stat was basically replacing the Pokeball mechanic, there would be no catching going on whatsoever. So I think it's safe to say that the decision to leave these two features on the back burner and not include them into the game is literally what allowed Pokemon to flourish the way that it has, because there was no way it was getting off the ground if these two things were actually in the game, making for a pretty dang big what-if scenario. And as if that wasn't a big enough of a what-if scenario already, in Generation 2 we have probably what is the biggest what-if scenario overall, and that is what if Pokemon Gold and Silver actually ended up the way they were intended to in the 1997 Space World demo build. Now, I'm pretty sure you know about this already, especially if you follow my channel, but there was actually a playable demo of Pokemon Gold and Silver at the 1997 Nintendo Space World show, and last year the ROM of that demo was actually dumped onto the internet, allowing data miners to basically get all the information that was left in the ROM, even the stuff that was unplayable, out of it, and it revealed a whole new vision for Pokemon Gold and Silver. Originally, the new Pokemon that were set to debut in these games was vastly different, including a number of Pokemon that never made it into the final game, and the Johto region as a whole was completely different as well, because it actually was based on the entirety of Japan outside of Kanto, making for a huge map compared to what we got in the final game. So to see that there was even more planned for it in the original idea for the game is just absolutely mind-blowing, and there's part of me that really wishes it would have happened, but I'm also really glad it didn't. The reason why I'm glad it didn't is because originally Pokemon Gold and Silver were planned to be the very last Pokemon games in the franchise, because Game Freak just didn't think they had a global phenomenon on their hands, so they basically planned a 2-game series and then they were gonna call it good. And because of that, they wanted to put everything they had into this final game, and it shows based on what we've seen in the demo. So basically, this one is a fascinating double-edged sword where we could have gotten an even better game than what we got in the final Gold and Silver had this actually happened, which is mind-blowing considering Heart Gold and Soul Silver and Gold and Silver are widely considered the best Pokemon games ever, but on the other side, that would come at the cost of the entire Pokemon franchise and 5 going on 6 generations of games that wouldn't have existed after that, which I think it's safe to say that was probably a pretty fair trade-off in the end. Moving on to Gen 3 though, one thing that isn't quite as big as the situation with Gold and Silver, but is still pretty significant, is the fact that originally in Gen 3, the number of Pokemon that a player can carry and the number of moves that a Pokemon can learn was originally considered to be changed in Ruby and Sapphire, but was obviously left out of the final game. Now, this information comes from Junichi Masuda in one of his blog posts, and assuming that changing the number meant increasing the amount of Pokemon you could have and increasing the number of moves a Pokemon could learn, that obviously would have done wonders for the game in terms of its structure and would have completely changed competitive forever. In terms of the main story and the single-player gameplay, it probably wouldn't have changed the experience too much, but in terms of the competitive side of things, that obviously would have completely changed everything because it would have added so many different new strategies to consider if you added a 7th Pokemon to your roster and a 5th move that your Pokemon could learn. Team building and move sets and literally just everything about the competitive scene would have been changed forever, and while we can't really say whether or not it would have been a good thing or a bad thing, just the simple fact that this was considered legitimately at all in the first place is pretty mind-blowing to think about, and it's mind-blowing to think how Pokemon would have been different if this actually happened. Now, coming in for Gen 4, we actually have a really big one, and that is the idea that originally the starter types of Grass, Fire, and Water were originally considered to be changed in this generation to Dark, Fighting, and Psychic. This information comes courtesy of Bulbapedia, who cites an interview with a Game Freak employee that was published on Yahoo's Pokemon Diamond and Pearl webpage during the game's pre-release period, and I think it's safe to say that Pokemon as a whole, or at least Generation 4, would have been so unbelievably different if we had a Dark Fighting Psychic starter trio. The interesting thing about this trio is that it's not quite as balanced as the Grass, Fire, Water trio is, because while Dark is weak to Fighting and Fighting is weak to Psychic, Psychic is completely useless to Dark as Dark is immune to Psychic, and so it's kind of interesting if that would have been kept the case, or maybe they would have done some balancing issues to make this trio as balanced as the original trio was. We know that a huge change to the competitive battling scene of Pokemon was made in this generation with the physical special split, so it is possible that they might have changed the effectiveness of various types in order to accommodate this new starter type trio. All I can say is that I am absolutely fascinated to know what a Dark type, a Fighting type, or a Psychic type starter would actually look like, since we know that the starters always get so much more attention to detail in their designs, but I guess this will kind of just be once again a what if scenario, because it doesn't seem like we're ever going to get this happening again anytime soon. Now, for Generation 5, we have what is admittedly a rumor, but it's a rumor that I personally believe in the validity of, or the potential validity of, and so I think it's worth talking about in a video like this. I've discussed this idea in a couple videos on the channel in the past, but the basic idea here is that Zygarde, the legendary Trio Master of Generation 6, could have actually originally been intended for Generation 5. So the idea for this came out of a leak that popped up on the internet during Pokemon Black and White's pre-release schedule, and it actually came from a leaker who at the time was actually known for leaking accurate information, and so he was somewhat trustworthy when this leak was dropped. So taking that into consideration and taking into consideration the timing of the leak itself, given that it was before Gen 5 even came out, it makes it all the more interesting when this leak actually talks about a third Pokemon, or a third legendary I should say, that was meant to go along with Zekrom and Reshiram as their trio master, that was described as a large green Cobra Pokemon. In addition to this, the leaker stated that there was going to be a grand total of 157 new Pokemon in these games, which was actually only one more than the final number we got in 156. So the fact that we never got a large green Cobra Pokemon that was a legendary and also a trio master in Gen 5, but we did in Gen 6 with Zygarde, and the leaker stated that there was going to be 157 new Pokemon, which is only one more than the actual number of 156, and all of this came about during a time when Pokemon Black and White hadn't even officially launched yet, so it was well before X and Y's release. That all just seems to kind of line up a little too well in my mind to just be completely untrue. And even though I will never be able to say 100% in all likelihood whether or not this is actually true, I think it does have probable cause for at least some interesting discussion, and if Zygarde had in fact been in Generation 5 like it potentially could have been planned, obviously that would have had a huge impact on Generation 6 later on, as Zygarde plays a very interesting role to say the least, but it is still a very big part of those games, so this would have had an impact on Generation 5 as well as Generation 6, which is pretty crazy. And when it comes to Generation 6, the biggest what if from this generation is easily, what if all of the questions from this generation that never got answered actually got answered? There are so many things in these games that went left unsaid, from the mysterious ghost girl to the Koroway train station to whatever is going on with those locked doors in the Kalos power plant. It just seems like there was so much more planned for X and Y and the 6th generation as a whole that for one reason or another was just scrapped altogether, and it's honestly such a shame. So if all of these questions would have actually got answers in the game, or maybe even a third companion game, not only would that have given us way more content to play through and enjoy, but it also would have provided so much more depth to the games as well. So I think it easily would have made them so much better than they already are, which is saying something because they're already pretty great. At the same time though, it's kind of a double-edged sword, because while knowing the answers to all of these questions would be amazing and obviously would have added to the gameplay exponentially, not knowing the answer at the same time creates a level of mystery that is also really cool as well. And even though it is somewhat frustrating, I think it adds to the allure of X and Y as well, in knowing that there's so many things there that still need to be answered. And even if we never truly get an answer to them, I think that mystery and that unknown also adds to the appeal of X and Y as games as well. So while it's kind of hard to say how Generation 6 would have ultimately shaken out, overall I think it still would have been amazing to actually learn some of these secrets. And last but not least, because Generation 8 is still a few months off, we have Generation 7. And the biggest what if of these games has got to be, what if the following Pokemon had actually been included in the game like it seemed they were planned to? Now, you've probably already heard of this, but within the data of Pokemon Sun and Moon, there are actually walking and running animations for every single Pokemon through Generation 7, which obviously suggests that the following Pokemon feature that is beloved by everyone was actually planned to make a grand return in these games before it was ultimately scrapped. Now, while this seems to be a feature that was scrapped pretty late into development, considering that the animations are within the data of the final game, I have to say that Game Freak was likely pretty well justified in their scrapping of this feature, because in all likelihood the reason why they scrapped it is because the 3DS couldn't handle that one extra moving model on the screen within the overworld, and it was probably just too much for the system to handle. However, since we are here to play the what if scenario, if somehow, some way, Game Freak was able to make this feature work within Sun and Moon, once again, just like with X and Y and its mysteries, I think the overall public opinion of these games would have been increased exponentially, and we would have had overall just way more better games in general than we got in the final product. Now, while Pokemon Sun and Moon aren't bad games by any stretch of the imagination, and I'd say they're probably actually pretty good overall, there's also a certain meh quality about them at the same time that I think comes from all of the unique changes and features that it introduced into the main series. These changes were well received by some, but others just wanted the tried and true formula of the gym challenge back in the game. So if an all-time fan favorite feature like following Pokemon made its reintroduction into the games with Sun and Moon, I think basically all would be forgiven, because this would have been the first time we had seen it since Heart Gold and Soul Silver, which was basically over 5 years prior to Sun and Moon, and that's over 5 years of people requesting for this feature to come back. And not only would it have come back in a big way, but it would have also come back in 3D. And I think that would have made such a huge impression on people overall that it would have elevated the opinion in their minds of Sun and Moon just so much higher than it is now. And I think it just would have made Pokemon Sun and Moon just a much more amazing experience and a much more better game, just straight up. Overall, a lot of different factors and a lot of different changes to people's opinion about games and the games in general could have happened if this feature was actually implemented, and it's pretty fun to think about how things could have been different. And there we have it, everybody. Those were the biggest what-ifs of every Pokemon generation, in my own opinion. Now, I really love talking about this stuff because I love talking about things that were considered and scrapped for Pokemon games. I think it's really fascinating, and so I thought it would be fun to talk about how Pokemon could have been so much different and potentially better if some of these things actually happened. If you guys enjoyed the video though, be sure to give it a like and let me know down in the comments below which one of these what-if scenarios you would have liked to have seen actually happen the most. And if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe as well for way more Pokemon content each and every week. I'm also on Spotify as well. You can check out some of my Pokemon remixes there and give me a follow. And if you do, it goes to directly support the production of videos like this and just the channel in general, and it's very much appreciated. So thank you so much if any of you are doing that. With all that being said though, I'll be back on Saturday with another video, so be sure to hit that notification bell so you can be notified when it goes live. And with all of that being said, I hope you know I love you guys, and I will smell you guys later.